My name is Kyle Hilding. I do the Spiritual Download video podcast on YouTube. And my guest tonight, I think for a third or fourth time, is Jackson Holzberg Buckley. So we'll have Jackson introduce himself.
Hey Kyle, I'm Jackson Holzberg Buckley. I have a blog at jacksonholzbergbuckley.com, and I also have a YouTube channel, which is just my name, Jackson Holzberg Buckley. Kyle and I did an interview in January of this year, which feels like eons ago because it was pre-lockdown. And we've done a couple conversations since then with each other and some with other people. So I think this might even be our fourth or fifth.
Yeah, for sure. And they've all been quite unique, really. But we always tend to find a groove in the conversation. So I'm really excited for this one too. So Jackson, do you want to introduce the topic tonight and kind of think about what your motivation was for this topic?
Sure. A while ago, Kyle, you had posted a diagram you created kind of showing the different aspects of the self as they pertain to spirituality. And I thought it was really interesting, in part because I tend to think in that way too. I'm a very systematic thinker. I like diagrams. I like creating order for things, even where it might not exist in reality. And so that kind of captivated my mind. However, I thought there might be some disagreement based on differing experience. And so I wanted to explore that too, because often you and I are on the same page about things. So I was like, oh, this might be a unique conversation for us. So I created my own diagram, and I think you said you were thinking about updating yours. So I'm not sure if you did. And I was thinking we could just kind of compare and contrast and talk about what each of us is basing these diagrams on and what they describe. I just want to say, for anyone who's listening, it's not like it's a debate and one of us is going to be proved right. They may overlap in interesting ways. I have no idea. Or we may be using, different language for the same kinds of experience. But I really just want to explore that with Kyle. And again, for anyone listening, you might begin to think, if you were to create your own diagram, which kind of lays out the parts of the self in this experience of life, what would yours look like? So that might be a fruitful product for the viewer of watching this discussion.
So Jackson and I will be talking about spiritual anatomy. Jackson came up with this idea. From my perspective, it sounded amazing because the idea of anatomy being, the construction of how humans are built, but not just our physical bodies. Spiritual anatomy, what part is it of us that lives in kind of a spiritual world that maybe we've experienced before, maybe in brief moments, but also knowing and experiencing that those are perhaps part of us too. So Jackson and I might have a different opinion based on our experience, our personal experience, but also you could say teachers or religions that have talked about these sorts of things. So that's one thing that I wanted to reiterate here in the conversation was I think it's really important to base our thinking from our experience. So how do we experience ourselves? How do we experience reality as well? What do you interpret as, okay, this is just me. Maybe this is just my unique human self that behaves this way. But what part of our experience or our consciousness is actually the same? What makes our essences the same essence, really? So that's, I feel like that's kind of where the conversation is going to go. Do you have any responses to that, Jackson?
Yeah, I actually wanted to jump in, so thanks for making it so I didn't have to. Yeah, I'm thinking actually about something you posted on Facebook earlier today about, what is science, and is it the only method of interrogating reality? And on the note of things we may have been reading or different teachers we've encountered, I recently read Autobiography of a Yogi, and not only from Yogananda, but also from his teachers in that book. Yoga is really described as a science, and people through this investigation of subjectivity, of inner experience, have reached common conclusions. And so that may be happening to some degree among our diagrams as well. And for me, that's always a really confirming aspect of reality, or affirming, I should say, that the more I get in touch with myself and begin to trust, my heart and my intuition and those sorts of things, I reach conclusions that have been laid out by these very old and cemented teachings. So, yeah, what we are doing is a kind of science, even though at the same time it's entirely subjective.
Yeah, I completely agree with the science part, mainly because of the idea of the scientific method is to go explore, right? And so like exploring our own selves again, to see like, what part of myself could be explained by science, but what part of myself just through my own experience is kind of self-evident, a self-evident truth or a self-evident reality. I think one of those would just simply be consciousness itself. And I think sometimes it's really easy to negate consciousness because it might be perceived as so subjective. Yet on another level, you could say, but all of us experience consciousness. So actually, it might be the middle thing that connects all of us, really. So, yeah. So, and we'll talk about like where consciousness, fits in our model and things like this. So let's just kind of get started. Jackson, I'll share my screen, and then I'll pull up your I guess your map or your drawing here, and then you can explain it.
I would almost prefer to go in the reverse order, because I kind of made mine in response to yours, unless you've updated yours.
No, so I ended up keeping it the same with some asterisks for it.
Okay.
So
yeah, I'd like it if you would start again, because mine was a response here, so I think it will make more sense after we go through yours.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I made this. Let me share my screen here on my desktop. All right, so you can see my screen here. This is the first one that I put down on a whiteboard before work one day. And so first of all, this could be really any way. This could be whether this could be like the idea that the human body's actually in the middle. Then it would go the human mind. Oh, excuse me. Then it would go the soul. Then it would go the human mind, and then it would go the spiritual heart. So let's see. Yeah, so it could go in reverse as well. The reason why I'm saying that is because here, on one perspective, the spiritual heart, from really my experience, is the center of the universe. So I would say whatever is the essence or the actual center of our experience, I would say is the oneness of all of reality. So it's actually what connects us with all of reality. And this is something that we can become conscious of through, I would say, practice of meditation would be one of the main tools. But this is something that I would say is in our anatomy, and it's actually everywhere. So the heart, I would argue the spiritual heart, is not just for humans. I think it's one of the key ingredients of the entire universe. And that might sound weird because that puts like some sort of like an emotion into the universe, like love or peace. Like the universe doesn't feel that, but you could say, well, but yeah, but the universe is made of it. You could say the universe is made of love and peace, and that's why we experience those things so deeply as humans.
Mm. Hey, Kyle, just in case this is already sounding foreign or intangible to someone, could you talk about like the sensation of the spiritual heart? What does it feel like?
Great question. So first of all, it is directly connected to our spiritual heart, which would be the heart chakra, which is kind of in the middle of yourself, you know, in the middle part of your back, I would say. That would be, you could pinpoint as a physical place as to where it is, but really it's the sense of I'm so interconnected with everything, and it's a feeling that everything around you loves you, actually. And the reason that it loves you is because you kind of grow in union with it. Like your experience is, oh, I'm no longer this separate human within my and my environment is outside. It's actually that you are your environment as well, and your body is part of the environment, and that's experienced through consciousness, experienced through our consciousness, and that's the gateway to the experience of everything else as well. So it feels like love. It just feels like everything around you is made of love, I would say.
And how do you think the other parts of your diagram relate to this spiritual heart? So do we need to, well, I'll just start with an extreme. Many people are almost solely identified with their mind. What might happen from being mind identified to get us to the point where we're aware of the spiritual heart? What are the steps in that process?
Yeah, so I would say there's like a quick way. So first of all, we can either experience our spiritual heart. We can have an experience of it that's very brief, which that's the case for most everybody, is that we've had experiences of it, but really in rare moments. However, some people are able to experience it like even half the time or most of the time or all of the time, just through, I would say, growing in union with that part of themselves through deliberate practice, which I would say meditation is one of the keys. Now, yeah, so that's how it would relate. And now the human mind, I would say one of the ways that you could do that is simply by deconstructing your human mind, starting with your belief systems. Like we were saying towards the beginning, with science. Now, there's a lot of we learn a lot about the ways that we think through, and we're taught that through science or through our education of science, basically. And that's something that we could begin to deconstruct. So really, any sort of belief system or any belief structure could be deconstructed, and that would be through the human mind part of it. And basically, you could begin to see like how your mind plays, and even your philosophy, plays tricks on you to believe certain things that don't have any grounding in I would say experience like this, where like you're just experiencing reality, or you simply know reality, but not as an idea.
It makes sense to me. I guess what I want to say is like the proof is in the pudding, in that the human mind would be able to think up a diagram like this, but on its own would not have the confidence to put it out in the world, right? The human mind is going to wonder, well, how can I prove that this is true, or that this is better than someone else's diagram? But you, from your spiritual heart, kind of like gave birth to this diagram and felt confident sharing it in the world. So I'm just saying that's a faculty that would come from that center sphere and not from anywhere else in the diagram, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's very true. It definitely came from my intuition through how I experienced these things through time. But also I had to use my human mind. Like I had to use my logic and my science and math to create a diagram like this, right? And like you said, this actually does not represent, does not represent what I actually experience. This is simply a drawing, right? And I don't know, when other people look at this, I don't know what they experience, or I don't know what comes up in their mind for them. You know, for me, it's coming from experiences that I've had.
That's making me think of science again, because paradoxically, that's a very scientific approach, that you don't need to make a claim about this being an accurate description for anyone else. That's sort of a withholding of, hubris or arrogance. We don't need for this to be objectively true. It's subjectively true and objectively real.
Yeah, it could definitely be objectively real in the sense that, what if somebody goes out there, they look at this model and they become a scientist themselves, and they're like, I'm going to go explore this model and maybe try and verify this model for myself. And that could be science for sure. And so the way that I want to say that could go the other way is that the spiritual heart could be in the outside because it's actually everything, and it's actually the most important. So it could be the biggest, and then go in reverse in that way. Whereas your human body actually eventually becomes the smallest part of your experience from your own subjectivity. So like you actually go in reverse through your spiritual practice, and you begin to identify more with your spiritual heart than your human body and your human mind.
I like that you bring this up, because this is the aspect of your diagram that initially prompted me to want to create my own, is that in my conception, it does go in reverse. And I was like, the spiritual heart isn't the center, it's all around us.
Yeah.
But I think something that's coming through to me in your talking about your diagram is it's both. When we really investigate inner life to the core, we encounter a seamless bridge to external reality. We encounter things like oneness, eternity in the spiritual heart, and they're too large to be contained in the single physical body. So this too is why I think you're able to say that the diagram could go either way, because it's both at once.
For sure. It's just depending on your experience at that time, because really sometimes there's times at work where I'm extremely identified with my body and my mind, like when I'm really, really busy, and then the spiritual heart would just be in the background. So it would be the whiteboard itself, but I'm not aware of the whiteboard. It's just what I am. But it's possible for me to get away from my human body and my human mind. I wouldn't say away from it. It's more that you can relax and let go of those things, and then you just automatically become what you are on a deeper level. But it actually includes, paradoxically, it begins to include the human body and the human mind, but from a pure state and a less identified state. More of your awareness is kind of in all the levels simultaneously.
If I may, I want to just talk for a moment about my own felt experience of these levels, because I still feel there may be people watching who are like, especially if they dropped in recently, they're like, what the hell are they talking about? This is generally the case with our conversations, but this one, as we said in advance, this is uniquely heady. But I'll say this, for the majority of my life, I experienced myself as a separate self in a blank universe. So I'm Jackson. That means I'm a body with a brain inside, and it has a finite period of time on Earth, right? And once it dies, there will be no more consciousness. My interrogation didn't really go farther than that for the majority of my life thus far. Once I started doing some of the things Kyle has talked about, so meditation, more so yoga for me is where I really made the breakthrough and began to feel these different aspects of the self. I realized that my breath within the poses was not only breath contained within my body. And again, this is this is a scientific finding when we really pay attention to our own experience. My breath was a vehicle for energy which transcended my body. And so I could feel currents of energy running up my spine and out of my crown regularly. And if you investigate the chakras, this is indicative of having a clear chakra system where energy is able to flow. In other words, this is how our experience should be, but most of us are, I would argue, too damaged and therefore disidentified from our body. What tends to happen in life is, this is my opinion, we become traumatized, the body becomes a site of pain for us, and we don't want to be in the body anymore. We don't want to live in the body. So we identify with the mind. And that trauma kind of festers and we lose access to this field of energy. But once we start to feel that, as I did through yoga, and it can be deepened through meditation. Kyle knows this, and I mentioned autobiography of a yogi earlier. Yoga and meditation were designed to be complementary, and yoga is meant to prepare us to more successfully or deeply meditate. But once we start to feel energy running through our body as a flow, we also become aware of these even deeper principles that, for me, align with what Kyle is talking about as the spiritual heart here. There arises the question, what is beneath the energy that I can feel flowing through me? What is that stillness? What is the quality that the Buddha described as the void? And this is where we begin to experience oneness, peace, love, a kind of calm that does not even need our awareness to preserve itself. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, I just wanted to ground these rings in my own experience, just in case anyone was out there and feeling lost.
Yeah, perfect. Is there anything else on this that you think I would need to explain a little bit more deeply, or that you have comments on?
Well, I'm curious what you mean by soul, because soul is a concept I actually chose to exclude from my diagram, and I've been back and forth on that matter for years, but it doesn't really feel like a meaningful concept to me anymore. And so I'm curious what you mean by that in your diagram and what your experience is of it.
Oh, yeah, really good question. So the soul for me is, so the spirit, first of all, the spiritual heart, like I mentioned, is the non-unique oneness that connects everything in the universe to everything else. So it's the commonality, the common ground. Now our soul, I would say, is also on a divine level. From our human perspective, it's divine, and but it's the unique part of what makes us unique within this oneness. So we are equally, from my experience, I'm equally my soul as I'm equally everything else in this. So like I'm equally my soul as I am the spiritual heart. So I would say my spiritual heart equals the spiritual heart on that level. So the spiritual heart can be you, your deepest essence, but also that means that your deepest essence is the deepest essence of everything else. And out of that and in that comes your spiritual self, and that's what is actually can go from body to body. Okay, so your human mind and your human body can be quite easily recycled on a much bigger scale, and the soul is that which would it animates. It's the thing that's really hard to describe that animates the human body and the human mind in an incarnation. And that je ne sais quoi, that it's hard to say what exactly that it is that goes from, or that animates these human bodies. But I guess it is, in a sense, an indescribable feelings or sensation that I am this human rather than I am not that human and stuff like that. So it's how we identify as ourselves, but on a very deep spiritual level rather than our human identities. Like I'm tall, I'm a Black person, I live in China. Things like this describe our human self, but it's the usually when we have a difficult time explaining exactly who we are, but we know deep down that we're something greater. And that would be these two levels, the spiritual heart and the soul. And they're not that, it's a spectrum. It's definitely a spectrum because we can experience the oneness a lot without the feeling of soul. But sometimes we have experiences deeply of our own soul as well. That has kind of a unique flavor of, I love me, I love myself. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the basics of how I experience it and how I've heard about it, things like this.
When you describe it, it makes sense to me, although my experience does differ. The word I would want to use for what you're calling soul is personality. And I think that's too material, too physical for what you mean. Is that true?
Yes, so it is our personality, but sometimes our personality has a unique flavor in just like this body, I would say. And especially our environment, like the environment in which we grew up with the parents that we had and things like this. Imagine just having different parents, yet being yourself. So what would remain and what would change? So yeah, certain things of your personality would remain, and I would argue that those would be more about like deeply who you are, but things that would change, those would be not directly connected with our deepest self.
So I think the sense I'm getting is that, again, using the lens of science, it might be that aspect or those aspects of ourselves for which we cannot account in physical reality. So for instance, I've had a fairly calm demeanor, been fairly comfortable being alone my whole life. Soul might be the quality that accounts for those traits. Where did they come from? Even at a very young age, even pre-verbal, I displayed these traits. I like the idea that it's on a spectrum with spiritual heart, because for me, it seems like, well, I'll express where I have a problem or where I encounter an obstacle with it, and that will explain my difficulty with the concept. So I'm most familiar with soul through reincarnation. And through reincarnation, we might say, I was this or that person in a past life, and I'm kind of carrying those resonances or those experiences, and I need to work through whatever in this life to try to improve my karma. We have all these concepts. The problem for me is the more I've gotten in touch with the spiritual heart, the absolute unity of things. And this implies for me that the same energy which lives in me lives in all beings, not only throughout all space in this moment, but also through all time. So in other words, if I were born, in a different country, to a different family in a different era, my personality would be made up of material circumstances, but this animating energy, this divine light within me would be equivalent. The more my experience of life has become situated in that, where I feel that almost all the time, that level of unity, it seems like I'm making an error when I say, you know, I was this person in a past life, because it seems to imply I was not all of these other people, right? I was, you know, I was a peasant in France in the 1600s, but I was not the king at that time. And for me, it seems more true that ultimately we are all beings simultaneously. Therefore, the soul feels like kind of an obsolete concept for me. I'm like, what is this really describing? Except maybe sometimes some energies feel more apparent to us than others. Sometimes I feel, I have peasant energy in me, you know. Sometimes that feels true and something I need to work through, perhaps. But I think that may be a manifestation of the personality in this life, as opposed to some absolute fact about me, that my soul had traversed from one body to another and that others were excluded. That's kind of where I've just had real difficulty in using it for the past year, I would say. I'm curious what you think about all this.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with most of what you said. And because I think really what we are deep down is that which is everything else, you know, the essence of everything. And plus, that's what is the deepest sense of us, or the sense of I exist. The essence of that is, you know, I would say the universe's love, right? The spiritual heart. Yes. And then the soul, I would say, is a little bit less important. Definitely a little bit less important. And it's a little bit more invested in, you know, the time, space, being on Earth, being a human being. It's a little bit more involved in the story, you know, or the incarnations and things like this. And it is essentially like, even though it is divine, it also has some sort of self-oriented agenda. It must, right? It must have some sort of self-oriented agenda that would mean that there are other agendas out there that might have different goals than yours. So there might be actually like conflict, maybe within the world of souls, maybe. And there might be some souls that are malevolent, you know, and they might want to bring, you know, maybe chaos or something to Earth, you know, or but other souls are born, you know, like Jesus or something like that. You know, his soul entered his body, and you know, ultimately he's God the Father, right? But he's also like uniquely Jesus somehow. But you know, which part of that is his soul, which part of that is his body, that's hard to say logically what it is. You know, but he had obviously a very bright soul, probably because he was extremely tapped into, you know, the energy of everything. When you're tapped into that energy of everything, right, then your soul, whatever that is, shines very brightly in a particular human body. And so I think our soul can actually be improved upon. It's not that it's this fixed thing. I think the purpose of living a human life is to improve your soul, I would say, along with, you know, being in continuous flow with the spiritual heart. So it's all like everything's happening. Yeah, I think I completely agree that like everything is happening at once, and that's completely true. Like that's from my experience, everything is happening now. Even though we have seemingly stories that happen in time and space. Yeah.
I like the way you put it, and especially the example of Jesus makes it a little more accessible to me. And yes, I would never advocate for someone to just like abandon the story or the work of their life. I think actually this is what happens to a lot of people when they start meditating, right? What they really do is like disassociate from the content of their lives. They're like, everything is peace, everything is love, there is no self. And usually this leads to like manic behaviors or conflict in their relationships or whatever, because they're not in the flow of their true feelings. They're not jiving with the content of life, which is literally what there is. We need to interact with it by virtue of our being. And yes, I have this experience as well, that I am person with a particular story, a particular energy, particular sets of wounds or grievances or goals, and I'm trying to make progress along these dimensions in my life. I would just say I think we are most successful at doing this when our energy is coming from the spiritual heart, because this gives us the ability to surrender and to move through life with ease, as opposed to, the soul, I really associate it with work. The soul is like, there are these things wrong with me, either from this life or from the past life, and I have to like correct and fix them. And the spiritual heart knows like, your purpose is just to be here. And part of being here is doing that work, but at the deeper level, all is right. And so, yeah, I don't know. It was expansive for me to talk about that. And you've persuaded me that a soul exists, but my experience of it is less salient than it used to be. That used to be the center of my spirituality. I think perhaps that's what happened. I became aware of this deeper level, and then the soul was kind of cast into doubt for me.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think on different points of the path, and it's a continuous path. We can be identified with one particular thing, and I don't think there's only 4 levels. Also, I think there are. I'm just basically putting all like an infinite amount of levels in 4 different categories. Because really, I just see it. I see the experience of consciousness that like there's just a million levels of it, and there's and not even consciousness, but I would say perspectives or awarenesses, and I would make that plural, awarenesses. That there's just like so many different ways of being, ways of experiencing the world and reality, and I don't think it's all been experienced yet. In time, I don't think it's all been experienced yet. So what's really important is having this, scientific exploration like mentality, or a philosopher mentality, but in your spiritual practice, and like being excited about like, oh, I want to experience that next level, or I'm excited to explore, while also being right here, right now.
Mm-hmm. This is really what I feel about life. And I wanted to mention this at some point. If your viewers haven't looked at my channel before, the video where I talk about most of these concepts that I've been bringing up in our conversation is my first one I ever created, which is peace, love, and the purpose of existence. It was sort of like a monumental thing for me, and afterwards I feel like I've just been shaving off little pieces of it and expounding on them, but it really is sort of my thesis about life. And part of that thesis is that our purpose here is to generate experience for consciousness or for spirit. And that is what gives me confidence that we don't actually need to do anything. There's no work we can fail. There's no experience we can have that would be invalid or erroneous, because it is always adding experience to consciousness. And life is sort of this school through which consciousness is acquiring experience. So maybe, unless you want to say something on that, we could shift over to my diagram, because that's really the aspect of it that I tried to expand after looking at your diagram.
Yeah, that sounds good. Because I think it'll spark probably a response from me. I'll share. And we have this next.
Oh, I did put soul in here. Jeez, I made a big fuss over nothing.
Then okay, self-awareness. So yeah, then I see. So there's a part of us that can reflect on ourself. Like self-inquiry is like a natural part of being a human, in a sense, like being aware of our own awareness. Is that kind of what you meant here?
Yes, that's true. But I meant more that, so we'll look at the green lady at the center. That's the self. That's what we experience as the human self. Everything else could be thought of as the spiritual heart. It's sort of the void within which life is taking place. So I'll start off from the upper left corner where we have spirit, consciousness, energy. And this may be controversial for you, and I'm interested to hear if you would do this differently, but I'm kind of collapsing those terms. The more I think about this, for me, those are the same thing. Consciousness is more of a psychological word for what, to yogis would be described as energy, and to Christians might be described as spirit. It's this pervading, kind of animating light, which we can feel at the base of life. Spirit or consciousness or energy generates a soul, which is the individual experience of those things. And for me, soul is, if I experience it, is sort of like an aura around mind and body. Mind similarly seems larger than my body, and then body would be the smallest unit, and I would place heart under body if I were putting heart there. And then as a consequence of living our life with a soul, with a mind, with a body, we generate self-awareness for spirit or consciousness or energy. And that's why that final arrow comes around the upper right side of the diagram. So what I was really trying to express with the whole thing was kind of a rationale or a purpose for existence, that spirit is producing individual beings who can have life experiences, and through whom spirit can become self-aware. So I'm not necessarily saying that humans have the self-awareness, but that the universe as a whole does through us. That's what I was seeking to show with the diagram.
Yeah, I definitely think and agree with the idea that there is something extremely fundamental in all of reality that, energizes this body. And that, like, it's not the reverse that I think a lot of scientists would say, where like, oh, there is a body, there is a mind, and now we can put a soul in it, and consciousness and self-awareness in it, and it's derived from the brain. But actually, I would say it's the reverse. It's like the brain was created through evolution, and evolution is, being created from that which is even greater than that process. I would put evolution also, I would say that there's an evolution that, science and biology are trying to explain. But also I think evolution is a bigger sense, because I think evolution is actually a key aspect of all of reality. Because if you think of evolution as not just life on Earth, but like all of like this physical universe, going from theoretically what they say about the Big Bang. Say the Big Bang is true. It's starting from somewhere, and now we're getting all of this complexity that the universe is now. The universe basically has evolved and will continue to evolve. And I think that's kind of what I would say is more in line with you could say the evolution of more like a soul or self-awareness or things that go beyond the human. So the human is on a different trajectory of evolution, I would say, than the evolution of the spirit realm.
Taking this notion of evolution, I would add it to self-awareness. In other words, the kind of evolution you're talking about seems another product of human life, through working through our karma, exploring our story, having relationships, making accomplishments. We are furthering evolution, not just for the human race, but for the universe as a whole. And I think it would be impossible not to do that in a life, because a person is going to reconsider things, going to grow, or die. And even that will be, a message for the collective.
Yeah, it could be a very individual perspective to say that, like, oh, I have to do a certain thing in this lifetime. In the sense that, like, if there are so many different lifetimes, then there's much less to really worry about in this one. Not like I mean, just the idea of, well, I need to wake up in this lifetime. Well, what if, like, we wake up in every one, in every lifetime? And, like, in all lifetimes in the future, yeah, that's going to be the point. It's like you get incarnated, and then in that incarnation, you wake up.
I'm laughing because the image that's coming to me is a person just like slapping their hand on the alarm in every lifetime, and thinking that they're doing it anew.
Yeah.
Like it's the trajectory of lives is just like a really disturbed sleep where you're waking up every 5 minutes.
Yeah. And seeing time from a much more timeless or from a perspective of like infinite time, like one lifetime, yeah, it feels like just going to sleep, one night versus all of the nights that you sleep in your life. That, like, you could say every dream is a different life. So what if, like, this one that we're experiencing right now, is just one level of that same, like, dream-filled universe.
Yeah, the soul seems to take individuality for granted, that there is an individual self. And individuality itself is kind of a recent concept, really arose with modernity in like the 1700s. In tribal societies, people didn't have individual choices in the way we now think of them, right? Where I can like choose to be in the relationship or not, or I can like choose to speak to my family or not, or I can take the job or not. There was a level of obligation that was taken for granted and really was just solidarity, so that the individual self was fused with the collective. So yeah, it just seems to, perhaps for me, it's a historical phenomenon, the soul is, rather than the kind of timeless reality that it's sometimes branded as. And I actually feel it may be disappearing as people have less trauma, as our lives become less individualistically focused, and people are more focused on the benefit of the whole. Will the experience of the soul start to disappear and just be replaced by direct line to that spiritual heart? It's something I'm wondering.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I do think you could say that the soul is evolving into something, and maybe eventually that, that development will dissolve the soul into, what you have labeled here, the spirit, consciousness, energy. It could all of the souls could unify into this spiritual consciousness energy, or the spiritual heart on my map. Or it could simply just evolve and become better. Like, we have better, more light-filled souls, or something like that. And that just makes me excited to think about the future of humanity. If that is the case, if all of our souls are helping each other out to improve, and maybe what's happening right now, like in the United States, with coronavirus, climate change, these sorts of things could be actually the short-term dip, and that we might actually learn a lot about ourselves and the world through these difficult times. We might actually come out of these difficult times with more improved souls, like more compassionate hearts, more care for the environment, more awareness into how to get along with each other, which is basically politics, the discussion about how to get along with each other. So yeah, what do you have to say about that?
No, I agree with you. A metaphor I was thinking of as you were talking about this evolution into sort of focus on collective well-being and understanding of union, right? Like this path we're talking about that brings people into the spiritual heart. What if that was almost a given in life? Someone is watching and just texted me that it's all good. What if that was almost a given in life, right? That people no longer have to go through the trauma of individuation and instead are just born into this sense of union with the universe. And the metaphor that came up for me is, say each soul is like a different color, a unique color in a spectrum of light. The logical conclusion of, a certain amount of souls having lived their individuality would be white light or pure light. Right now, through our individualized souls with their separate traumas, stories, work, whatever, we're able to glimpse this collective heart, the spiritual heart that you spoke about. But it might be that eventually we'll evolve to such a place where the two merge, where our experience of our own soul is the experience of the collective. That's where I would like to see humanity go, and I am hopeful about that as well.
Yeah, I'm extremely, extremely hopeful. I see that. What if the human soul, not just the human souls unite, but also our human minds? What would that look like if people are able to tap into the one mind, and like not just a couple of people who are channeling the one mind? I guess you could call the Akashic records maybe is the same as the one mind, but rather than just having a few people channel that, what if that becomes science? To learn how to channel the Akashic records, or learn how to bring your consciousness to new dimensions, and things like this. What if this becomes science?
Or if science becomes an element of what we are talking about. Because for me, and I know you've experienced this as well, kind of the vaster the realms I got in touch with through my spiritual practice, the more obvious it became that, my mind was a faculty I could access, but it wasn't the whole of me. And scientific measurement was a tool I could use, but it didn't define me. There's a deeper knowing that I have access to. And so I think it might become that science is a phase of learning along this path, but what you and I are describing is recognized as scientific also.
Yeah, so do you see a merging? If that's the case, do you see science and spirituality merging, or do you see that each one like improves their weaknesses through basically learning more from the other? What do you see?
I more so see science as ultimately outmoded by spirituality. Yeah. Perhaps that's arrogance on my part, but I mean, one of science's preconditions is removing the self from the equation, and I think spirituality comes forward and says, first of all, you can't do that. It's an illusion to think you can do that. And second of all, your experience of self being part of the observation or experiment does not make it unscientific. As you and I spoke about from the very beginning, ostensibly you and I are two separate individuals practicing yoga, meditating, all the other things we do. And there have been many others throughout history, and we arrive at highly, highly similar conclusions. What is that but a scientific process? It's the most scientific process because it's occurring in the inner realm. We are verifying these things on against all odds, I would say.
Yeah, and basically, you know, at some point, philosophy and science said that it's kind of impossible to do science in the inner world. Yet, I think it is happening in spirituality, and I think not just in ourselves, but you know, there could be that point where we all are tapping into that oneness area, and we're actually somehow connecting or even communicating on these other levels. And I've had experiences of that, and I see that as the future. I see communication and interaction from more of a that oneness area, oneness level of awareness.
I've had experiences of it during this conversation, even where a moment before it occurs, I know how you're going to end your phrasing, and therefore I know what I'm going to say next. And it's just this experience of seamlessness that is really a kind of telepathy and occurs when human beings are connected through this deeper source, right? It's not like I'm not taking notes, I'm not preparing in advance what I'm going to say in that way. It's just emerging from the same source that it's emerging through you. I want to say, just on a practical level, I'm going to go eat dinner with my family in a few minutes, so we should close down. I have a suggestion for how we can do that, but I wonder if you have thoughts too.
No, I actually don't have any thoughts.
Lucky you.
Nothing is here right now. So,
well, I was thinking we can just go back and forth, and we can list some takeaways and or questions. We could make it poetic, so just kind of single sentence, something I learned or concluded during this call, or a question that's still standing. Do you have one?
Yeah, I can go first. You know, I grew in my sense of being able to empathize with other perspectives and not just from the perspective of my own mind.
That's the same for me, and soul re-emerged as a meaningful concept for me. I think to me, the soul is the individual experience of universal energy.
Interesting. Yeah. I see that things like the mind or the soul are adaptable and can become more prominent in awareness given our environment or what we're experiencing or what sort of incarnation we're in.
I see that part of the purpose of our existence is evolution toward more wholeness, union, and care.
Yeah, and I see that like the concept of soul is, it doesn't really matter what you're experiencing and how you define the term soul. Sometimes it comes from your culture. You know, like Asian cultures might be more in line with Buddhism and say like there is no soul, but Americans, the more individualistic culture might say, yeah, we have a soul and that's the essence of myself. So
I'm going to turn to questions now. Kyle and I hinted that there might be other levels beyond what our diagrams contained. What other levels or aspects of experience might you have noticed that we failed to notice, or that haven't been discovered yet?
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say isn't really a question, but I guess, does this conversation motivate somebody to go and experience from their own experience what is that deepest part of themselves?
On that same note, I just wanted to ask the viewer, where in yourself, where in your spiritual anatomy are you most strongly identified, and what elements of that anatomy might still be foreign to you. Both these questions will help you begin your exploration if these ideas are fresh for you.
Well, great. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone, and thank you for listening. Jackson, do you have any last comments?
Not really. I really enjoyed that, and it was expansive for me. I'll voice that it was also tiring for me. I felt like we were doing very technical, like sophisticated work, and it was at the end of a long day for me. So yeah, that was just a part of the experience for me. But I think I learned a great deal, and I appreciated how our diagrams, to me, it felt like they synthesized in a way that I wasn't expecting, and that improved my understanding.
Yeah, I saw that too, how there was a lot of similarities between our maps. All right, thanks again, Jackson.
Yeah.
Enjoy your dinner.
Thanks for hosting me. Thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah. All right, peace and love, everyone. See ya.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.